recording? All right, good. I'm going to clean up the beginning here. But here we go. Hey, everyone. I am here with Ahmi Lee and David Taylor, professors at Fuller Theological Seminary, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with them today. Hi, Ahmi. Hi, David. How are you doing?
Hi, Marcus.
Hi.
Thank you for having us
here.
Yeah, I'm glad to. Sorry, I should have asked maybe each of you individually. I'm learning how to interview two people at the same time still. Let me ask you to introduce yourselves briefly. Ahmi, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Ahmi Lee. I'm an assistant professor of preaching at Fuller Theological Seminary. I've been at Fuller for, about 6 years, and I'm enjoying that I get to teach students how to preach and to form them, and that hopefully through their ministries, the church will, the pulpit will be stronger and will make an impact for Christ's kingdom.
Nice, good. And David, tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yes, I teach. My official title is Associate Professor of Theology and Culture. In practice, that means I get to teach systematic theology classes, and I get to teach classes in worship and theology of the arts, worship in the arts. And I'm developing a course on science fiction and theology, which means my job is awesome.
Oh, wow. I might have to find a way to audit that course or something.
Please.
I always tell people, if the movie has lasers or time travel or spaceships or superpowers, you'll probably find me watching it. So that's totally my thing. Yeah, good. That's awesome. Well, we've gotten to know you just a little bit already. I have a couple of other get to know you questions that I want to ask, and I'll ask each of you individually. And we'll start with you, David, this time. David, what would a mirror opposite of yourself be like?
Okay, so I've been thinking about this question. I asked my wife, I said, what do you think a mirror opposite would be? She says, me. And what I thought she meant was like, I'm Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, like I am my own opposite. She said, no, I, your wife, am your opposite. I was like, okay. But if I had to choose somebody else, I would choose Tony Stark from, who plays Iron Man, or who is Iron Man in the Marvel, because he is, gregarious and extroverted and like super brains and technology. I'm just none of those. I mean, I hope I have a decent brain, but his brain is like a superlative brain, and he's just, charismatic.
Awesome.
To the nth power.
Tony Stark is your mirror opposite. That's a great answer. That's the first time the Marvel universe has been, I think, maybe specifically talked about on this podcast. My son and I just watched the first episode of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier last night. That was a lot of fun. Good stuff.
I'm definitely saving that.
What's that, Ahmi?
I was going to say, I'm definitely saving that for the weekend after the finals week.
Oh, yeah, there you go. There you go. Good. Ahmi, let me ask you, what would a mirror opposite of yourself be like?
Yeah, actually, it's really funny. My husband said the same thing as David's wife. He said that would be me. We are very different, but we get along really well. I think that a mirror opposite of myself would be someone who is like a homebody, enjoys a good nap, can sit back and relax. Whereas me, I really am pretty active. I mean, I'm always either cleaning or trying a new recipe, or I love traveling, talking to people. So, someone who knows how to relax and can just kind of enjoy a nap or something.
That's great. That's great. All right. And then, Ahmi, I'll ask you this next question first. If your life was a book, what would its title be?
That's a hard question, actually, but I think it would be just related to my previous answer, something like the tales of a hummingbird or something.
Nice.
Just a super active bird that's always on the move and doing something, and that would be me. So something like the tales of a hummingbird.
Awesome. I like that. And then, David, what would the title? How would I ask the question? If your life was a book, what would its title be?
Okay, so I think the title of my book would be Something is Better Than Nothing. And I have been saying that to artists for almost 30 years now, just as a way to say that nothing begets nothing, and I can guarantee that. but something does beget something. And if you just do a little small thing, that small thing may beget other small things, and then they give birth to other sorts of good things in the world. So I feel like it's been a motto my whole life, and it's proved rather helpful to me, I think.
That's great. I love that. Something, what is it? Something is better than nothing. Yeah.
Something
that's good.
Yeah, is better
That's
than nothing.
good. Oh, is that what you said? Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I love it. I love it. Well, it's really good to be talking with you guys and kind of get to know you a little bit. And I'm looking forward to this conversation about the church after COVID and what that translation may be like, the transition might be like, and kind of your thoughts on it. And so I just want to start with this question. And David, we'll go back to starting with you on this one. What do you think is the biggest lesson that the church has learned from this past year of COVID?
Okay, so I have a couple responses, but I wanted to qualify myself just because Ahmi and I are academics and we think these kinds of things, to say that the answer to that probably is a deeply contextual thing. I'm not sure I can presume to speak about everybody, but I'll mention two things, and Ahmi, I'll be curious to see what you think. The first thing I think we learned is how much bodies matter, bodies, physical bodies, human bodies, as it relates to sickness, as it relates to racism, and as it relates to our embodied separation, how we were in so many ways invisible to one another's bodies. So that's the first thing. And then I think the second thing, as I observe things, at least in the North American context, is the idea that fractures, relational fractures, political fractures, ecclesial fractures don't happen overnight. And so things were exposed or brought to the light, but these things, had a incubation period that preceded them. And so what does it mean for us to offer pastoral care and discipleship care and communal care that reckons soberly with the ways in which fractures begin very small, in very sort of small units, small relational units, small secret places in our own lives, and then under duress, they manifest themselves in sort of exaggerated forms. But I guess that would be the second thing I observed.
Yeah. Okay. I'm fascinated by the first part. Well, by both of them, but that first part about bodies. Can you say a little bit more? Just kind of unpack that a little bit more.
Well, I think when things are going well, or you're in a relatively happy or homostatic, when everything sort of has equanimity, you can take things for granted. So when we're sick, or when there's a plague, I think we discover how frail our bodies in fact are, and how, in terms of the ecology of our lives, both literally the environment that can spread, disease through breath and spit and things like that, things that we don't think about, right? And then racism sort of rears its ugly heads in the ways that bodies are dehumanized. The very color of someone's body becomes the object of abuse, and in tragic ways, we saw this over the last 4 years. Not that it obviously didn't exist before, but sort of the grossness of it, I guess, the gross sort of ugly reality of how bodies are regarded, and then the fact that for church leaders, pastors, worship leaders, and then parishioners, we could not be in each other's embodied presence. And I was thinking about that in a small group that we have right now. We're reading Bonhoeffer's Life Together. And I was telling my wife just a couple of days ago how frustrating it is to me that I don't really get to know the people in our small group. They're new to me. But I don't get to know them because I don't have all those little moments of relational tissue formation that happens before, that happens during the getting something to drink or eat, and that happens immediately after. All those are forging trust and connection and mutual knowing, and that happens with bodies. I mean, you can maybe replicate it through Zoom, but you can't replicate the three-dimensional
Yes.
experience of bodies around you, and the turning and the seeing and the hearing and the body language. So I think these things, were things that I noticed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, what do you think? What are some of the things that we learned from this past year of COVID?
Yeah, I think I think of twofold lesson here, and the first thing I think about is actually quite related to what David just shared. I think for me, when I think about this past year, I think about how we realize how life is fragile. So
Hmm.
what David kind of was talking about earlier, but how life or bodies is fragile. So
Yeah.
it's if we ever forgot this simple truth, I feel like just every heartbreaking event from this past year has reminded us, reinforced this, pounded it into our heads about just how fragile everything is. Just from the horrifying numbers of lives we've lost due to COVID to the devastating economic and even educational effects of a global pandemic on many
Hmm.
people, to especially for people, the communities of color, the political turmoil and social injustices that even David was talking about here, that we've witnessed as a nation, but not just America, but also around the world.
Yeah.
Um, just we're all painful reminders that the world is fragile and we are frail as human beings, that our plans are tenuous and our political systems are broken. And yet at the same time, the other side of that, I think we have realized that recognizing our fragility has also taught us to be present. Being present, and I think this kind of relates back to David's point about this embodiment in our bodies, but being present at every fragile moment of life, because we must hold every second loosely with gratitude and trust in God, choosing to be fully present in the moments that we want to actually escape from. And I think many of us have felt that on Monday
Yeah.
mornings when we're like, okay, and we're back here again, and we want to escape, but we have to be present, present to God of the universe. I think when we realize who still delights to be with us in our stuffy quarantined life, and present to family and friends in our church, and who we can't
Hmm.
physically be together and reach out or touch. And so I think we realize that, although life is fragile, we are fragile, our plans are fragile, that it actually invites us, calls us to be more present, to be fully present, and to
Yeah.
enjoy those moments as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Kind of a similar theme there. Certainly, that presence is something I think we miss. I'm an introvert. I didn't miss it too much at first, but the longer this has gone, the more I have missed it. And the church that I serve, we started meeting outdoors in person, socially distanced and everything in November, and it felt really good just to be with, as you were saying, other bodies. Um, at the same time, there's, I think, some anxiety about it. I was just talking to another pastor friend they're coming back together on Easter. We're recording this before Easter. And he's nervous about it. He's like, I don't even know what it's going to be like to be preaching to people instead of a screen. And I said to him, well, it's kind of like riding a bike, it'll come back to you. But but there is sort of this readjustment, right? That is coming. And so my next question would be, what do you think will need to change as we move forward, so that the church can thrive moving forward? Ahmi, I'll start with you. What do you think needs to change as we go forward?
I thought about this question, and the more I thought about it, I feel like for me, it's that we shouldn't romanticize the past,
Hmm.
romanticize that somehow the past was somehow better, and wait for things to go back to normal, which I think is very kind of our natural tendency. I think there is danger to stop living whenever we face adversity. I know I do,
Mm-hmm.
uh, because fear and despair can easily paralyze us. So
Yeah.
we're prone to stopping in our tracks and waiting for things to kind of pass. But I don't know if that's what God wants from us.
Yeah.
God, who led his people through the sea and through the wilderness and through the rise and fall of kings, And so I think the season has reminded us of our identity as people of faith and what that means. And I think part of what that means is that we take steps every day, trusting that God is good, God is faithful, and that God will not disappoint us. And so, we trust that God will make a way, and that God will keep his promises. And so I think about not so much, dwelling in the past and reminiscing the past, but really anticipating and being hopeful. And I think that hope is really a crucial element to us, not only surviving, but thriving in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask also, so you teach preaching, and that's your field. Do you think there will be some development in the way preaching happens, or has this year impacted preaching, do you think, in some way, as it will continue into the future?
Yeah, I think the impact's just been far-reaching, right? I mean, there are just so many things that we can name here, but I think I think that the gospel has always been far-reaching. It's always been had a global reach, but I think in some ways, we have kind of forgotten that because preachers, we think about our pulpit, our ministry.
Oh, yeah.
We think about our one sermon, that individual, that single sermon that we have to preach. And I think what this year has reminded us is that, wow, the gospel is really spreading everywhere. It's bearing fruit all over the world. It's not just about me and my pulpit, but just like I can get on Zoom and preach to all these people, or just like people can log onto YouTube and watch one sermon and it can make a global impact. I think it just kind of made us realize, wow, the gospel is really amazing. It really is global. It's not just about me and my congregation, but that we, the people of God, we are a global church. And if we have ever forgotten that, I think this season has made us realize we're very connected. We're always making an impact. How we relate to one another, what I do, will have a ripple effect somewhere else. And I think it's kind of helped us realize that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's true. It is amazing. I put sermons on for my little rural church in Imperial County, and not that we're getting tons of views, but anyone or anywhere in the world could, right? And you can send those. It is kind of amazing. This new reality. They used to just be for televangelists or whatever. But yeah. David, what do you think? What needs to change, do you think, so that the church can thrive as we go forward?
Yeah, I was thinking about that question as well. And I don't know if I have an answer that involves an action to change, but more of a kind of a continuity of sorts. So I write a lot about worship, and I wrote an essay for Christianity Today the week after, the country shut down and all churches, went digital. And I had surveyed a bunch of pastors, over the course of like 24, 36 hours, and just said, how are you feeling? What are you feeling nervous about? What are you hopeful for? And so took all that data and turned it into an essay. And I just read it recently because, it's a year later. And I was thinking to myself how this past year has been this extraordinary laboratory for churches to experience and experiment with digital technologies and digital ministries, especially ones who were either nervous about them or allergic to them. It just sort of opened up. It broke through certain theological and liturgical force fields and said, you got to try it. Right. You got to see what happens. And so the first thing I would say is, I think the years to come, is a wonderful opportunity to continue to develop and hone your digital ministries, to discern how it is that what you do digitally, that is, how you spend your time, money, and energy as a church investing in digital ministries, may serve the mission of the church. And I was thinking about this in relationship to a New York Times article I read a couple of weeks ago about Glennon Doyle, who's a very famous woman, personage, like really Christian, non-denom evangelical, and then has sort of been migrating towards this I don't know how to describe it, but I'll just call it woo-woo land of spirituality. But she's got the billions of followers. And discipleship is happening on Instagram. Pastoral care is happening. Community is happening. Mission is happening in all these digital spaces that a lot of churches have been ignorant of or contemptuous of or afraid of. And now we've had this opportunity to say, well, hang on. Or maybe we could be part of it. Maybe that could be part of our portfolio as a church, not to do everything, but to do a few things that we feel called, skilled, graced to do. But also liturgically or worship-wise, I hope that church leaders and pastors and worship leaders have learned the reality that there are a lot of people that cannot always easily get in a car or a bus or on a bicycle or with their two legs and go to a physical space. They're elderly or disabled or sick or they're part of the persecuted church. Massive populations of believers who have had no options but to go troll through YouTube and find a decent sermon. So what does it mean for us to serve our people or our neighbors, digitally in those ways? Yeah. So that's the first thing. The second thing is sort of like a converse of it, that as we maybe, expand in some sense our digital ministries, we also discern how to go even more deeply, even more intentionally into embodied relationships. So going back to my original, comment about bodies, and I was thinking about this, how a lot of my pastor friends have really struggled the past year in not being able to be present in real time to people as they are suffering or as their marriages are breaking apart or children are experiencing mental health issues. And how it is that there's just certain things that can happen only in that embodied presence, face-to-face, real time, one day to the next. And I think there's a lot of trauma that we're going to be addressing as church leaders for years to come. And so what does it mean for us to do less so that we can really focus and go deeply, not just as leaders, but to enable our people to be more like quality over quantity, to put it in those terms, so you can really be present and saying, gosh, how do you feel your relationship with God has broken down? Or how do you feel like, your sense of self has broken down over the past year in some ways? And how can I be present to you in order to catch in real time how it is that human lives break down, in these little bits and pieces. So I guess those are the two things that I was thinking about, like expanding, honing our digital ministries, but simplifying and deepening our embodied relationships. So those are two things.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's interesting how there's these two things that we hold in tension, and I think so I was I've been on our Presbytery's committee on preparation for ministry for a long time, as chaired the last few years, and we were wrestled with, what do we do with students who are far away or can't do CPEs in person or those kinds of things? And there was a real vigorous discussion about can we do these kinds of things digitally via Zoom, right? And one of the things this last year taught us is that there's a lot we can do digitally. It doesn't quite replace what we can do in person, but we can do maybe more than we thought, right? And so that's part of the adapting that we've done over this past year, and hopefully we keep leaning into that adapting with discernment. Anyway, my thought. So the other part of this is the spiritual formation part. What kinds of qualities do leaders need to develop, do you think, as we move into this post-COVID world? David, I'll start with you.
At the risk of redundancy, I'm going to repeat myself.
Yeah, that's okay.
And say that, and without presuming again to know what every church leader should or shouldn't do.
Yeah.
And I don't think this is terribly original. Actually, I'm 100% certain that it's not original. But I do feel like maybe I feel sort of a deeper conviction that as church leaders, we should ask God to make us wise to know how to do less, how to do fewer things. And I know this goes against so many of our instincts, especially if we have ambitions and energy and the poor are many and they're always with you. But what does it mean to be like Jesus, who in fact did not go to every town, did not heal everybody, did not preach to every community, did not minister to all the peoples equally. So he did a few things and he did them well. And, it's always a tricky algorithm to transpose from Jesus' ministry to our ministry. You just have to sort of say some things are just for Jesus. But I do think the principle holds at some level that we may be better off doing fewer things really, really well, so we can be truly present to each other and offer each other the kind of care that is needed, not to completely forestall all the entropic effects of a fallen world. We can't predict and save every marriage, every child that is abandoning the faith, every instance of abuse in the world. We can't. We're not the Holy Spirit. But when marriages are breaking down, when families are struggling, when youth are wrestling with their faith and abandoning it, or whatever it may be, as Ami knows, and it's a high touch ministry, a high touch activity that is required to do that work. And so in emergency cases, we send people to professional counselors or therapists to say, hey, can you rescue this? Or psychiatric care. But what does it mean for us to pull back in time and say, if we slowed down and did less, how might we increase each member of our community's capacity to minister to one another in thoughtful, careful, Jesus-y kinds of ways, so that in one sense, not as church leaders, we're not dispensable, but we are not required to be on hand everywhere, that we need to be. But we're doing less. I really do feel like that's the thing that I keep seeing. I've seen for years, and I was a pastor for 10 years in Austin, Texas, before going back to school and coming at Fuller. So I think that's the thing I always wrestled with. My instincts were more. It's always exciting. We're going to do great things for God. But I kept seeing people just slowly topple over the edge. And because I was go, I was like a 90-mile-an-hour car going through a neighborhood street. I just couldn't see all these things happening in real time. So I feel a sense of guilt or regret over those things. And so now, as a professor at a seminary, I try to say, don't do what I did, So those are some thoughts that come to mind.
That's great. That's great. Ahmi, what do you think? What are some of the qualities that leaders need to develop in order to lead effectively after COVID?
I think that's a great question. I really resonate with what David just shared. I think I can come at it from a slightly different angle, but I think we're essentially share pretty similar things, I think. I thought about qualities of leaders, and I think for me, if I'm really honest, I really feel like what this past year has shown us is that even the best personal, organizational leadership skills are not enough to lead the church faithfully in a tumultuous world. Innovative ways of thinking and creative solutions are needed for sure by the church and by the world, but they are not enough. I think this year we've seen that we're not smart enough. We're smart, but we're not smart enough. We're not adaptive enough. We're not creative enough to be able to face all the unknown things, challenges, obstacles, pain, disasters in a rapidly changing world. So I've been thinking about this, and I think kind of like what David is saying, I think what we need more than ever is to be grounded. It feels kind of counterintuitive because we think about being agile, being flexible, being nimble, and being able to pivot. But I think in order to do that well, we actually need to be grounded so that no matter what comes at us, we're not swept away by the whirlwind of chaos or lose a sense of who we are in Christ. But that we're able to press through and be daily conformed to his image. And so I think in order to do that, in order to be grounded, I think it begins by creating space in our lives. And I think this is where I relate to David's idea. We have to create space in our lives so that we can find ourselves grounded and focus on the few good things that we really must do. And so personally for me, instead of coming at it from what kinds of qualities, leadership qualities do we need today, I've actually found myself in this season finding this incredible comfort and strength in the old spiritual practices. So practices like prayer, fasting, lament, gratitude, Sabbath, hospitality, or advocacy. These are simple things that we have kind of said, they're kind of old. We've done that. But I think in order to face the future, it's not it's innovation is great, but I think we have to hold innovation and are called to be creative and to be curious with this other aspect of that call, which is to be grounded and to keep on doing the things that we used to do, the things that are important. And so I find myself in this season having to declutter my life, open up space so that I can turn to God and turn to others. And so my church in this season has really been helping me to do that. And we're going through just resources of doing these kinds of engaging these spiritual practices right now. So I would say those kinds of practices that nurture hope and anticipation and readiness to engage God's mission in the world, I think really helps us to lean into the future.
Yeah. That's good. There are a lot of skills we could learn, right? But we need those those grounding practices to give us the direction that we need, the wisdom to know where we're going and how to get there. And that's good. How? What about you guys? How have you been formed over this past year of COVID? What has done to shape you in this past year? Ahmi, why don't you start?
Yeah, but I think everything I've been sharing the past 20, 30 minutes have been a lot of things that I'm learning personally. So it's not like someone preaching from the pulpit, but it's really things that I feel like God has convicted me, things that I'm relearning in my life again. It's always the same lesson of surrender and trust. I feel like it's like a lifelong lesson that never goes away, but it just keeps on coming back and I have to keep on learning it. And in this season, I feel like that big lesson and also tied to that is this lesson on not losing hope and joy and a sense of wonder, no matter what. Just even when life feels repetitive and mundane, even when we feel disrupted and overwhelmed and sorrowful, how do we still find hope and joy? And I think that's a spiritual discipline. And I think it's a spiritual discipline that kind of that we can do well when we are really surrendering and trusting God.
Yeah, surrender. I know, because we got no control over something like a pandemic, right? You trust God, you do what you can do, and what else can you do? Yeah, that's good. David, what about you? Have you been shaped over this past year?
Well, I think I might be echoing something that Ahmi has been saying throughout all your comments, Ahmi. So I think this past year has surfaced in a very acute way. I mean, I should say I'm embarrassed to say this, but whatever. How addicted I am to productivity and achievement. Now, I've known this since I was in college, and I've gone to counseling for my entire year. But this year, kids are at home. You're limited in what you can do and where you can go. And so, when you're helping out with school, you have less hours of the day. Then you're tired physically, and you're tired mentally, you're tired emotionally, and you're doing the same amount of work, but you can't really do the same amount of work. So you start cutting the things that you think you can cut. So you call the publisher and say, I need an extra year to get a book done.
Mm-hmm.
And they graciously say yes. But then you start feeling bad. You think, I'm gonna fall behind. And I'm not going to stay apace with all my peers. And that's going to make me feel embarrassed when I go hang out with academic people. So I'm going to avoid hanging out with, so basically I've been going through withdrawal from this addiction to achievement and maximal production. So I've decided to go back to counseling and have somebody really, really help me figure out what is deep down inside of me.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing related to, to what you're saying, Ahmi, is I'm an introvert like you, Marcus. And I love being alone for hours and hours on end. But I realize that being, let's just put it this way, cooped up with my wife and kids, I'm not really that great at being truly relationally present. Because I'm fidgety and I want to do things and produce. So everybody gets managed and shuffled and there's a schedule and I'll talk to you. But I'm like, what am I doing? What am I doing to my marriage and to my, children by behaving this way? And how has this adversely, negatively, dysfunctionally affected my ability to be present to other people? Simply for the sake of their presence, rather than I'm going to be present in order to accomplish something, which is just vicious.
Yeah. Right.
So I think that's what it's exposed, which is, embarrassing. But if you just remember, you're never too old to learn stuff. You're going to be okay.
Absolutely. Right. Sometimes it takes something like a pandemic to lay bare, right, the things that we don't know about ourselves, or some kind of a crisis, or some kind of a dark night of the soul, so to speak, right? Anyway, boy, thank you so much for sharing everything that you've shared today. This has been really, really good. And I'm grateful just for the wisdom that you bring, not only to your work at Fuller, but here to this conversation. And let me just ask you in closing, if anyone wants to find out more about you or your work or anything you've written or whatever it might be, where can folks go? Ahmi, why don't you start?
Yeah, you can find my my profile on Fuller website. I think you can just do a faculty search on a Fuller website. I don't have personal website at this time, so that would definitely be a good place to start.
Okay, great. Awesome. And David?
You can find me on Fuller. I do have a website, not because I think I'm awesome. It's just something that helps do stuff in the world. So it's wdavidotaylor.com because I got names. So wdavidotaylor.com.
Okay, good. And anyone who's doing a theology and science fiction class is awesome. So just so you know, my opinion. Anyway. Hey, thank you to both of you. This has been really great. And someday we'll maybe do something like this again. But thanks so much.
Thank you, Marcus.
That's great. Thanks, Marcus.
Good. Awesome. That's that we'll cut it right there.